Even during these COVID times, the United States seems hell-bent for leather on sharing nuclear technology with countries around the world, an extension of the policy President Dwight D. Eisenhower called Atoms for Peace in his speech to the United Nations in 1953. But Atoms for Peace quickly went in the opposite direction because, as an award-winning investigative journalist explains,
Atoms for Peace? Not for very long. In quick order, India had the bomb because it was provided with a nuclear power plant. Any country that has a nuclear power plant has the material, the plutonium, which is produced in any nuke, hundreds of pounds, 300, 400 pounds a year of plutonium. The Nagasaki bomb had just 20 pounds of plutonium. It has the material, it has the plutonium, and the trained personnel to build nuclear weapons.
Well, when you consider how the U.S. is currently pushing nuclear reactor technology around the world, and then you learn that uncomfortable nuclear truth from a journalist with the reputation for excellence of Karl Grossman, there is no doubt that, yes, indeed, you are right now, this very moment, sitting in that seat that we all share.
Nuclear hot seat, what are those people thinking? Nuclear hot seat, what have those boys been drinking? Nuclear hot seat, the corium is sinking. Our time to act is shrinking, but our activists are linking. Nuclear hot seat, it's the bomb.
Welcome to Nuclear Hot Seat, the weekly international news magazine keeping you up to date on all things nuclear from a different perspective. My name is Libby Halevi. I'm the producer and host, as well as a survivor of the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island from just 1 mile away. So I know what can happen when those nuclear so-called experts get it wrong. This week, a wide-ranging, deeply informative interview with journalist Karl Grossman, who knows where the nuclear bodies are buried and in quick order fills us in on where they are, what they are, along with some ideas as to what we can do about it. We will also have our COVID-19 nuclear update, numbnuts of the week for outstanding nuclear boneheadedness, and more honest nuclear information than Dr. Anthony Fauci would ever be allowed to tell the White House press corps. All of it coming up in just a few moments. Today is Tuesday, May 5th, 2020, and here is this week's nuclear news from a different perspective. Starting with the COVID nuclear report. The coronavirus has put the Fermi 2 nuclear reactor refueling outage on hold. The facility in Michigan, halfway between Detroit and Toledo, Ohio, has instituted an extended safety stand-down because of the coronavirus, and it will likely keep the plant idle much longer than expected. Fermi was in the midst of the latest refueling and maintenance outage, which began on March 21st. Much of the work and operation has been suspended until test results are completed on all personnel, including antibody testing as well as viral testing. At Millstone Nuclear in Waterford, Connecticut, in the midst of the refueling of one of its 2 active nuclear reactors, a process that has brought in about 750 temporary workers, 10 employees at Millstone have tested positive for COVID-19. According to Millstone Security Officer Jim Foley, who is also the Vice President of the United Government Security Officers of America's local chapter, the arrival of the new workers has caused concern among some current employees. He said security officers have had to fight for personal protective equipment as well as partitions at access points to separate staff from security. As the wife of one security officer said, these security officers are interacting with every person that comes into that plant. Now they're preparing for the outage, and that means hundreds of outside people in addition to regular plant staff. These are essential workers. I mean, if you don't have security guards at your nuclear power plant, you're going to have a bad situation. There have been no substantive responses to these comments made by owner-operator Dominion Energy. At the Hanford site in southeast Washington state, known as the most toxic place in America, for more than a month, coronavirus has brought cleanup of the 586 square mile site to a near standstill. And now Hanford workers are looking at the very real possibility of returning to work, and some of them are terrified by the prospect. One maintenance and operation worker said, "When you come back to work, what's the expectation for protections? There are none." A technician said, "There's no way to keep social distancing. You're right up in somebody's face, they're breathing on you, they're sweaty." Tom Carpenter, executive director of the Hanford Challenge, a not-for-profit watchdog organization in Seattle, said that he has been getting at least 10 email and phone calls in 2 weeks in March from employees worried about Hanford not providing face masks or gloves or requiring social distancing to protect them for coronavirus. He said, "People were asking for protocols on how to survey the people and material and what kind of products to use. What kind of procedures do you need to do? Do you need to spray it first? Do you need to wipe it first?" Just all the instructions that they were asking for to do their job and feel like they were being protected. 2 workers have been diagnosed with coronavirus, but there is almost assuredly more. In Russia, the chief of Rosatom, the state nuclear arm, said that the pandemic creates a direct threat to Russia's nuclear cities, which have all been closed. The cities are closely linked to Russia's nuclear industry, several of which are closed to foreigners. Special deliveries of ventilators and personal protection equipment were being sent to the closed town of Sarov, east of Moscow, and other towns where dozens of cases of the virus have been registered. In New Mexico, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has announced a 60-day extension of the public comment period for the proposed nuclear waste dump by Holtec. This is for comments on the draft environmental impact statement for Holtec's proposed spent nuclear fuel storage facility near Albuquerque, New Mexico. We'll have a link up on the website to an article, "The Hidden Nuclear Risk of the Pandemic," by Victor Galinsky and Henry Sokolsky. Great context. And a non-COVID story. In Russia, as of Friday, May 1st, which is the most recent information we can find, over 200 firefighters were still battling the fire in Chernobyl's exclusion zone after a month. More than 11,000 hectares, almost 45 square miles of forest, have been affected by the fires in the predominantly uninhabited zone, which is still contaminated from the nuclear power plant disaster more than 3 decades ago. While officials deny that there has been any spread of radiation from the smoke and ash of the fire, a senior environmental official, Igor Firsov, reported as the fires began in early April that radiation in the Chernobyl zone was detected at 16 times higher than normal background levels, and he provided a photo of his radiation monitor to prove it. Now here's this week's featured interview. Karl Grossman is one of my favorite interviewees for Nuclear Hot Seat, because when it comes to the history of nuclear malfeasance, he calls it baloney, Karl knows where all the bodies are buried, how they came about, and what has been done to oppose them, sometimes successfully. Karl has done investigative reporting for more than 50 years, hosting the nationally aired TV program Enviro Cover-Up for 28 years. He has written and presented TV documentaries, including 3 Mile Island Revisited. Karl is also the author of 6 books, including Cover-Up, What You Are Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power. And as if that weren't enough, he is a full professor of journalism at the State University of New York College at Old Westbury, where his courses include investigative reporting. We spoke on Friday, May 1st, 2020. Karl Grossman, it is always a privilege and an honor to have you on Nuclear Hot Seat.
It's an honor and a privilege to be with you, Libby. You are right there on the front line in terms of the scourge. It's an equivalent plague, frankly, a radioactive plague of COVID-19 in terms of its consequences, the plague of nuclear power.
And the thing that I've been pointing out that's the same between nuclear and COVID is that they are invisible. They are a threat to health. We have no way to contain or control them yet. And the only thing that's different is the timeline. COVID is immediate. We can see it happening. Nuclear is happening over a longer arc of time, but it is not dissimilar.
No, it's a killer. Nuclear power, atomic energy is deadly. It is lethal. It's radioactive COVID-19.
Now that I have you on the show, let's talk about your perceptions about, first of all, the overall strategy and intention of the Trump administration regarding nuclear energy, not only in the United States, but in the world.
Well, it's in plain sight of what Trump and his band of scoundrels is the only word one could use, what they're up to in terms of nuclear. I mean, I have in front of me here the Daily Caller, which is the right-wing equivalent of Huffington Post. And the headline here, this is the middle of the Trump administration, May 26, 2018, the Daily Caller. And the headline, it's a big story too, Trump administration spearheads international push for nuclear power. Again, Trump administration spearheads international push for nuclear power. Now, with all the dastardly things that Trump and his scoundrels do on a daily basis, I mean, it's hard to follow. I mean, every morning it's a new outrage. But this is so important that, again, they're spearheading, they're orchestrating, they're trying to push globally this lethal technology, which we all at this point should know about. I mean, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, Fukushima. We talk about every decade, a calamity, a catastrophe. We all have to understand that this is not a technology that we can live with. I mean, literally, we can't live with this technology. And furthermore, in 2020, it's talking about what's in plain sight. Safe, clean, green, renewable energy is here. There's no need for this. I mean, sometimes people have to do dangerous things. This is not a dangerous thing that we have to do. It was a dead-end technology from the beginning, just to promote, the contracts and the jobs involving it. And I can get into the history. I've written a lot about this, of the Manhattan Project, the crash program to build nuclear weapons. And after the war, the folks involved and the corporations involved, principally General Electric and Westinghouse, try to figure out how we're going to perpetuate all these contracts, all these jobs. So they thought of, most of it was mad science, nuclear-powered airplanes and nuclear-powered rockets. I spent a lot of time on that. And the use of radioactive material to zap strawberries and potatoes. You could eat a strawberry if you wanted to, and in 20 years' time. And then this other scheme that they would use in the early reactors that were built up at Hanford, up in the state of Washington, to produce plutonium for weapons. I mean, that was the Nagasaki bomb's fuel, plutonium. And virtually all nuclear weapons since involved plutonium. In the course of producing the plutonium, there was a lot of heat. So these characters looking to perpetuate a vested interest figured, hey, we can use that heat to boil water, to turn a turbine and generate electricity. And also, actually, the original scheme was to produce plutonium for weapons. There would be dual purpose to these reactors. So we're talking here about a technology which is deadly, which is unnecessary. And we should be talking about more these days, all these wonderful new, I mean, I'm speaking to you from a little house, over 100 years old, in Sag Harbor, New York. It's a salt box, a New England model with a big roof. And on that roof is 38 solar panels. And if I would walk outside now and point to the meter, to the electric meter, you'd see it's going backwards most of the time because those photovoltaic panels are energizing this house. Well, there's also a couple of thermal panels virtually all year round. It's amazing. And in March, you go down to the basement and you look at the thermometer on the water tank, and it could be 50 outside, but the thermometer shows it, the water coming down from the roof at 120 and 110. My little house actually is representative of what can be in terms of all this country, all this world, between solar and wind and appropriate hydro and geothermal and tidal power and wave power and on. We can have energy we can live with. Nevertheless, because of this vested interest behind atomic energy, there's been this push for decades and decades to ram nuclear power down our throats, to cause us to take the radioactive pill. And in the middle of it these days is the Trump administration.
When you say that the administration has been spearheading internationally, what are some of the steps that it has taken that perhaps have not hit our consciousness in the news?
Well, the Saudi Arabia deal is big because they're in arranging the sale of nuclear power. I mean, and Saudi Arabia needs nuclear power like a hole in the head. I mean, it has more oil than it knows what, at this point, knows what the cost of a barrel of oil now is zero. I mean, there's sunlight in the Middle East. In fact, there's sunlight all over this planet that can easily power Saudi Arabia. In any case, the Trump administration playing a proliferation game, because you start providing nuclear power plants to countries like Saudi Arabia, and we could talk about the Prince of Saudi Arabia these days and his moral or lack of moral qualities, what kind of person that is. And what you're doing is really creating a situation that, well, it goes back to this baloney Atoms for Peace program. That was one of the schemes, well, in the 50s to sell this, again, this vested interest, this notion of atomic energy. And in 74, actually it was Canada provided a reactor to India, and our then U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, trained the engineers in Atoms for Peace. Not for very long. In quick order, India had the bomb because it was provided with a nuclear power plant. Any country that has a nuclear power plant has the material, the plutonium, which is produced in any nuke, hundreds of pounds, 300, 400 pounds a year of plutonium. The Nagasaki bomb had just 20 pounds of plutonium. It has the material, it has the plutonium, and the trained personnel to build nuclear weapons. So here you have the Trump administration deeply involved in, promoting proliferation in terms of the domestic situation. I can go on and on about all the nuclear evils of the Trump administration. As bad as the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been through the years, it's just been a rubber stamp for the nuclear industry. NRC, no real cares, Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Now it's worse. It's absolutely worse than ever, just lowering standards or whatever the standards were. So the bailouts of nuclear plants, the only two nuclear plants being constructed in the United States right now, the price of each, incidentally, is $13.5 billion. These two plants in Georgia. Wall Street won't give money for nuclear. It knows how financially it makes no sense because those safe, clean, green, renewable technologies are cheaper than nuclear. It's from a financial point of view, nuclear makes zero sense. Trump administration up to its neck in bailing out the project that's going on right now and looking for more projects. I mean, one can go on and on and on. This is as bad as it gets in terms of a nuclear push. And it's been bad through the years. Think Reagan administration, think of the first Bush, the second Bush. But now with Trump, again, what he's looking to be, and his administration has been looking to be, the spearhead for an international push for nuclear power. I mean, If there's hesitance to build them in the United States, and there sure is, peddle them overseas, have them being built in, well, as I say, Saudi Arabia, and a list of countries that may be available because of baloney pitches and bribery.
We do have a little bit of good news on the nuclear front here in this country. We are talking on May 1st, which is the day after the Indian Point 2 nuclear reactor has been shut down for good. First of all, congratulations to you and any of the activists who worked on this, because it's an important step. Give us a sense as to what this shutdown means.
Well, the good news, and it's great news, because Indian Point is just less than 30 miles from Manhattan. It's right along the Hudson River, north of New York City. An accident, and there's been so many mishaps and problems and accidents. There's also an earthquake fault, which exists right near Indian Point 2 and its companion nuclear plant, Indian Point 3. I mean, we're talking about 22 million people within a 50-mile zone. And remember Fukushima, how the U.S. State Department told any American citizen within 50 miles from Fukushima to evacuate? Well, in the 50-mile zone of the Indian Point plants, this is the largest human concentration in the United States of America. It's New York City, it's Western Long Island, it's parts of New Jersey, it's Connecticut. Bob Pollard, who a wonderful man, he used to be with the Union of Concerned Scientists, he actually coined the term that Indian Point was an accident waiting to happen. And what an accident it would be. It would be another Chernobyl, it would be another Fukushima, affecting even more people because there's so many people, and there would be no escape. But we'd all get on the George Washington Bridge and try to race west to people would be trapped, people would die, lots of people would die. That's why I say this is the radioactive equivalent nuclear power of COVID-19.
So with the closure of one of the two nuclear reactors that is on site, does this take the danger down by half? Is there still a considerable amount of danger there? And I understand that there is a gas pipeline that still runs next to the plant. How are these connected, and what can we do to lessen the danger going forward?
Well, Indian Point 3, and originally there was 3 nukes. Indian Point 1 didn't even have a basic emergency core cooling system and had to be closed, leaving us with Indian Point 2, which is now closed. Indian Point 3 is supposed to close next year. The liars for hire of the nuclear industry have been on the radio, and this has been going on for years here in the New York area, saying without Indian Point and the electricity it provides, we're screwed. Again, they lie for a business. New York State, and I live on Long Island, part of New York State, and every area of the United States, every area of the world can put together a different energy mix in terms of safe, clean, green, renewable energy. Here in New York, what the push has been, solar power, and New York seems, well, it's in the Northeast. It's actually on the same latitude as Madrid. It's actually a pretty sunny place. Wind is abundant. I mean, I'm a sailor. And in fact, my little house is just a city block from Noyak Bay. And the wind is blowing all the time, or most all the time, in the Atlantic, offshore New York, offshore Long Island. If the wind's not blowing, the sun is out. I mean, there's all other ways to generate. Here in New York State, the plan is to utilize all those other ways to generate electricity instead of Indian Point. The plan is, I think it's 2030, which isn't that many years away. It's 10 years away to have, and I forgot the percentage, but it's a very large percentage of all the electricity from New York generated by safe, green, alternative sources.
NEI, the Nuclear Energy Institute, which, as we both know, is a PR mouthpiece for nuclear energy, has been pushing a petition now that calls for Indian Point to continue operating. And they've been using all of the nuclear industry's false talking points, claiming that nuclear energy is pollution-free. And now they actually have the nerve to say that by not using nuclear, it could worsen the effects of COVID-19 because of pollution being generated with energy generation, blah, blah, blah. And they're claiming that on this petition, they have 5,000 signatures from groups including, and here I quote, environmentalists and climate activists. How seriously should we take this position, and how should we frame it?
It's just more baloney. I mean, every decade or so, the nuclear industry and the nuclear establishment within government puts together a new line of baloney. I remember decades ago, it would be so cheap, it would be too cheap to meter nuclear. And in recent years, it would be that nuclear is great as a solution to the global warming. What they failed, and they talk about how a nuclear plant doesn't emit greenhouse gases. What the liars for hire failed to mention is the nuclear cycle, the fuel cycle, the mining, the milling, the fuel enrichment, are heavily carbon intensive. I mean, a major source, the nuclear fuel cycle of greenhouse gases. So this is not a technology that could replace coal and oil. And actually, nuclear plants themselves emit radioactive carbon.
And then, of course, there's the need for waste storage virtually forever, because plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years. So that is something else that threatens to be carbon intensive as well. But talking about storage, there are two angles here. First, I'd like to find out your perspective on how COVID-19 has impacted on the nuclear industry, both what they are claiming and what they are trying to hide. I mean, they're claiming that, they're the answer to carbon pollution, which is ridiculous. Last week, we had Kevin Camps on the show regarding the NRC blowing off the legal objections of Holtec building a so-called interim nuclear waste storage facility in New Mexico that would require the transport of high-level radioactive nuclear waste through 45 states. And Kevin and I basically agree that the NRC was moving opportunistically while we've been distracted with the demands of this pandemic. What are some of the ways that you have seen COVID and its ability to either be a smokescreen or an enabler to the nuclear industry be employed by the nuclear industry?
In fact, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a crisis, a full-scale crisis for the nuclear industry globally, because you need people, you need human beings in those machines to somehow manage them and keep the nuclear reaction in check. And what's been occurring is in nuclear plants all over the world, COVID-19 has been spreading among those employees. I mean, here's a piece, the Montgomery News, this is in Pennsylvania, headline, workers terrified at Limerick nuclear plant amid coronavirus. Same sort of thing has been happening in Russia. Top officials in Russia talking about the same problem, this concern of coronavirus spreading among plant workers, and they're trying to keep those plant workers on site, not letting them, it's a quarantine in place, but for how long, for how many hours? Moreover, back to the United States, here's a piece. As pandemic rages, federal nuclear regulators put keeping reactors running ahead of public health and safety. Because of the spread of COVID-19 among reactor engineers, reactor operators, all these nukes should be shut down right now. If you're talking about what they call a pause, this is the time to pause. In fact, it's a time to stop, to end, to terminate nuclear power, because it's a clear demonstration about how dangerous these machines are, so easily crippled by a pandemic.
We'll return to our interview with award-winning investigative journalist Karl Grossman in just a moment. But first, yep, Leave it to the nuclear industry to look at COVID-19 as an opportunity to make gigantic strides towards spreading another invisible threat to our lives and our futures, nuclear radioactivity. If one reads between the lines of recent media releases, it seems that the industry has been lavishing its money amid COVID times to set up a big international push for more nuclear reactors, more weapons, and more support technologies, with their attendant horror stories for people and the environment. And mainstream media is not covering nuclear stories as a matter of course. Their resources are going to COVID and stories more immediate and of local interest. That's why you need Nuclear Hot Seat. We look at the nuclear aspect of our world every week, and especially now with the COVID-19 impact on worker safety, reactor safety, and the nuclear industry's manipulative trickery during this time of fear and confusion. Nuclear Hot Seat is the only place you can count on to continue to report on the ongoing, evolving nuclear truth about the COVID nuclear connection, while not dropping the ball on other nuclear stories around the world. But I've got to be honest with you. I really need your help right now if I'm to be able to keep this show going. There are monthly, quarterly, and annual expenses just to have the tools in place to produce, host, post, and support the show. To keep things going, now more than ever, we need your help. So, right now, take a moment to support us with a donation. Just go to nuclearhotseat.com and click on the big red donate button to help us with a donation of any size. Please, do what you can now. And know that however much you can help, I'm deeply grateful that you're listening and that you care. Now back to this week's interview with award-winning investigative journalist Karl Grossman. One of the things that I found interesting is way back when I first started doing a weekly update on the COVID nuclear connection. At that point was when the Limerick article came out about them being terrified. That was the word that was in the headline, and the story got picked up a lot. And I was at that point doing a rundown on all of the different nuclear facilities and how many COVID positive cases had shown up in each. And this is way back at the beginning of the refueling cycle at Limerick. So I did this roundup of all these different places and all the numbers. And within 3 days, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission put out a statement saying that they were no longer going to report on how many people were sick at any facility. Really, they've clamped down. We've heard about Vogel, but that's a construction site. That's not inside. So we don't know the nightmare that is going on. Also, the NRC has changed their rules about how many hours workers can work, that they can work up to 12 to 16 hours a day. They can be worked 12 to 16 hours a day, up to 86 hours per week, and 14 days in a row without a break, which sounds an awful lot like slavery to me. If these highly skilled, important workers who are in a dangerous environment aren't allowed a rest, aren't allowed a respite, it sounds like they're not even allowed off premises. And what this speaks to is the fact that there is an unfolding and ever-growing nightmare inside these nuclear reactors that we are being prevented from learning about until and unless another whistleblower or set of whistleblowers comes forward and is able to get that information out to the outside world and to reporters.
Dr. John Goffman years ago stressed that nuclear power had to be 100% perfect. Not 99, not 98%. It was so dangerous and so lethal to so many people that to do it, there had to be 100% perfection. And there's no 100% perfection on this planet, at least, in this world at all. Dr. Goffman, who was an associate director at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, broke from the nuclear establishment, wrote a book with Dr. Arthur Tamplin, Poisoned Power. That's what this is about. That was the title. This is about poisoned power. It's about a technology that rose because of vested interest, not because of some advancement in technology. People were looking for money by GE Westinghouse selling these machines. Those engineers, those scientists were looking for jobs and cushy places economically for themselves. And that's what caused this horrid technology to come upon us. And that's why, again, there should be a pause. There should, beyond nuclear, that Kevin Camps is the most superlative organizer for, radioactive waste specialist. And I'm on the board of Beyond Nuclear. And so I know Kevin's great work and the work of the other members of the staff of Beyond Nuclear. They've been calling for a shutdown during this period. But beyond that, what Beyond Nuclear, and it's a great group, and listeners might want to go to the website of beyondnuclear.org and see all they do. What Beyond Nuclear's mission is to eliminate, to end, not just a pause, to stop, to terminate nuclear power on Earth, and also the other side of the coin, to get rid of nuclear weapons. And again, there's this, like I explained, the Indian situation. Any country with a nuclear facility has the material, the plutonium, and the personnel to build nuclear weapons. And maybe we'll make it through this generation with this carrot and stick approach. Giving a carrot to a country that does something in regard to proliferation, a little bits of something, and a stick. But ultimately, particularly with the likes of the Trump administration, spreading nuclear power plants, spreading nuclear reactors, spreading nuclear technology through the world, honestly, we ain't going to make it. I mean, ultimately, your grandchildren and their grandchildren, the United Nations designate certain portions of the planet as nuclear-free zones. In other words, there should be no nuclear weapons in those zones, the 7 areas that are so designated: Antarctica, South Pacific. In my view, if we're going to make it, if humanity is going to make it, if life is going to make it, the entire planet must be a nuclear-free zone. There should be no nuclear power. There should be no nuclear weapons. And then we'll make it. If we don't do it, and that this might sound terribly radical. I mean, how are you going to put the genie back in the bottle? Terribly radical. But frankly, trying this game of carrot and stick, that's the more radical approach. That's the approach that doesn't work. As an example of the genie being able to be put back in the bottle, go back to what happened after World War I. Because of the horror of chemical weapons, the enormous deaths and horror deaths on the battlefield during World War I, after the war, the world came together and banned chemical weapons. I mean, it's not been perfect. There have been countries that have used chemical weapons, but basically, chemical weapons have become verboten. The genie was put back in the bottle. Humanity realized that this invention of chemical weapons, this development of chemical weapons, was just so horrible and so bad, and it had to be eliminated. And the same has to occur to nuclear power.
Not only on the planet are nukes a problem, but you have been teaming up regularly recently with Bruce Gagnon of the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Reactors in Space to talk about some of the threats we face that are moving ahead in terms of mining the skies, having weapons up there, using nuclear technology in space. We did have an excerpt from a webinar, a Zoominar, that Bruce was on last week's show. We took about 10 minutes of what he was talking about. But could you elaborate on what is going on up there, that while we are concerned here down on Earth with having masks and gloves and living through our trip to the grocery store, there are other people who are planning on what to do for millennia to come up in space?
Well, just quickly, how I got into this issue goes back to 1986. I broke the story in The Nation magazine about how the next mission of the Challenger involved a plutonium-fueled space probe. And if the Challenger hadn't blown up in January, but on that next mission date in May, I mean, you would have had plutonium spread all through. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to Disney for a few hundred years. You talked about the toxicity of plutonium. I wrote a book called The Wrong Stuff about the use of nuclear in space. And they've been, this isn't like the sky is falling. Both in the US and Russian space programs involving nuclear, there have been accidents, serious accidents. 1964, a satellite with plutonium aboard didn't achieve orbit. It was the power source, and the satellite came crashing down, broke up, disintegrated in the atmosphere, spreading plutonium all over the Earth. Dr. Goffman, who I mentioned before, who went on to become a professor of physics at California, Berkeley, he long connected the SNAP-9A accident, it was called, with a heightened level of cancer. Lung cancer is the big problem. People breathe in a microscopic particle of plutonium. So I wrote this book, The Wrong Stuff, and then I kept pursuing it. Why using nuclear in space, period? I mean, after actually the SNAP-9A accident, NASA began developing solar for its satellites. And now all the satellites are powered by solar. It's like the International Space Station. So no need. The connection was a military connection. It was the other side of the coin. Again, Star Wars, Ronald Reagan's Star Wars in the 1980s was predicated on battle platforms with hypervelocity guns, laser weapons, and particle beams, serious weapons, which would be powered by nuclear reactors or super plutonium systems. In fact, General James Abramson, who was the head of Star Wars at one point, at a conference, he declared that without nuclear in space, we're going to have a long extension cord going to Earth, bringing up power. So Nukes in Space was just tied together with weapons in space. So I wrote a second book. Dr. Michio Kaku wrote the introduction to this one, called Weapons in Space. I was involved in the formation of Bruce Gagnon's wonderful group, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. I suggest listeners go to their website, space4peace.org. They do protests, and they're the leading group in the world challenging this madness. But to jump ahead, now under Trump, we have the U.S. Space Force. In December 2019, I mean, this is an encore of Star Wars. Trump signed the papers to create the sixth branch of U.S. Armed Forces, a U.S. Space Force, as he declared. I mean, this is Trump. I hate to use his words, but what he declared, I mean, it's again in plain sight. It's not enough, said Trump, to have American presence in space. We have to have American dominance in space. The U.S., said Trump, and this is at the signing ceremony, must achieve the ultimate high ground of space. And in the military, you take the high ground and you have control over what's below. And the notion through Star Wars and now through the Space Force is the U.S. would achieve dominance in space, and from space be able, with laser weapons and hypervelocity guns and particle beams, and inevitably they'll be powered, because again, you can't put an extension cord to these battle platforms up from Earth, by nukes in space. You would have nuclear in space. It's utter madness. And just most recently, this is March 2020, and I'm quoting from this is a website, The Drive, how the Space Force has just launched its first new offensive weapon. This isn't in defense of anybody. And in fact, if you really want to go back to how this all started, after World War II, the U.S. brought these Nazi scientists, including Wernher von Braun, over to the United States on the Project Paperclip. And von Braun was the guy behind the Nazi V-2 rocket. And they brought them ultimately to the Redstone Army Arsenal. And there, hundreds of these former Nazi scientists developed, the Redstone rocket was a duplicate in large measure of the V-2. It was the first U.S. rocket able to carry a nuclear weapon. This was Wernher von Braun and his Nazi rocketeers, and the genesis, actually, of the U.S. space military nuclear program. It goes back to those hideous Nazi scientists who should have been tried for crimes against humanity, not given positions at the Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. Meanwhile, and this is so important to understand, this flies in the face what Trump and earlier Reagan had done. The weaponizing of space, the turning of the heavens into a war zone, flies into in the face of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. In the 1960s, after Sputnik had been launched by the Soviets in the 50s, the US led, working with the Soviet Union and the United Kingdom, putting together an international treaty, which has now been signed by virtually all nations on Earth, which declares that space is a global commons to be used for peaceful purposes. It bans weapons of mass destruction in space. And in recent decades, and this goes through several administrations, our neighbor Canada, Russia, and China have worked to expand the Outer Space Treaty to enact what's called the PAROS Treaty, Prevention of an Arms Race in Outer Space Treaty. And that would not just ban weapons of mass destruction in space, it would ban all weapons in space. And guess what country has exercised its veto at the United Nations? And I've been to the UN and I've seen this. The United States. It's shameful. My country, time and again, when this comes up, China votes for it, Russia votes for it, Canada, of course, votes for it, country after country. And then the US says, nope, and vetoes it. So the claim that the US Space Force is necessary because Russia and China are up there militarily. Russia and China do not want to expand their national treasuries on weapons. It's very expensive. It's not like, having a battle platform in space with a laser weapon. It's not like buying a Bradley fighting vehicle. We're talking about millions and billions. And I've spoken to Chinese diplomats. I've been to Russia and I've spoken to their officials. They don't want to do this. That's why they've been for the PAROS Treaty. They just want to keep space for peace. But let me tell you, if the US does this under Trump, as it's moving ahead and doing, Russia and China are going to be up there. They're not going to tolerate, they're not going to let this one country achieve dominance in space, achieve the high ground, take the high ground, and from the high ground be able to control the planet below. I mean, they've had some experience, both countries, in terms of being invaded. They're not going to go for this. They're going to be up there with weapons too. And what a future that's going to be. Edgar Mitchell, one of the astronauts, walked on the moon at a rally, the Global Network Against Weapons of Nuclear Power in Space, organized in Florida. He said, if there is going to be a war in space, it'll be the last and only war in space, because it would be so devastating. It would be so calamitous. I mean, there'd be so much debris, and a lot of it radioactive debris, because these battle platforms, one would hit the other, falling to Earth. The deaths, again, going back to COVID-19 and the monstrous loss of life it's causing, the deaths that war in space would cause. And in terms of, some people listening to this show might be like Trekkies, there'd be so much debris up there that humanity would not be able to get a rocket up and out and explore the universe and look for, what was the motto in Star Trek? Other civilizations. Everything would be completely screwed up. And again, to stop the US Space Force is so critical. To stop what Trump has been doing is so important, because once it's done, once the US is up there with space weaponry, again, other countries will follow. It'll be Russia and China, and it'll be India, it'll be Pakistan, and the list will go on. There'll be no going back. And so people need to get involved with the global network, get involved actively in stopping this madness.
That leads me to a point of perspective, which is we're at a unique time in human history right now. And given that there is time, we've got the internet, we perhaps have the chance to gain larger perspective. Where do we need to be focusing our attention now to make the greatest impact to turn back the various nuclear threats that are there? You just suggested being in contact for the Nukes in Space issue with space4peace.org, and that's the number 4, space4peace.org, which is global network. What other steps do you think people need to be thinking about and acting on to use this time to make the biggest difference possible?
Well, as a famous labor leader said over a century ago, organize, organize, and organize. Got to watch who you organize with. I would heartily recommend Beyond Nuclear, because Beyond Nuclear, it's based in Tacoma Park in Maryland, it's out of Washington, D.C., is this one important organization which connects the obscenity of nuclear weapons with the outrage of nuclear power, and is looking to free the world. Beyond Nuclear, free the world of nuclear and to go beyond. So Beyond Nuclear is an excellent organization. Another organization, I was on the board of this organization for many years too, the Nuclear Information and Resource Service. Their website is nears.org. Good organization. Greenpeace is an excellent organization. And there's others. There's smaller organizations all over this country, all over the world that you can get involved with. And again, the global network in terms of this global issue of nukes in space and weapons in space. You're well up, but you got to work on this. I mean, the vote in a few months is going to be very important, and that scoundrel Trump and his scoundrels, and he being the chief scoundrel, have to be thrown out. But there's more to it. People have to be active. Noam Chomsky, in a recent interview done by one of my journalism students, where I teach journalism at SUNY College at Old Westbury, was interviewed in recent weeks. Dr. Chomsky, a famed historian and linguist and political analyst, he's saying people have to be active along the lines of, he said, the civil rights movement in the United States that marched and was involved in direct action. What I suggest is people be active. And also in terms of media, media is very important here. The press is important. And you talk about, the new technologies of media, and that's great. I mean, it's wonderful. People can go to YouTube and you can get unfiltered information and so forth. And there's some excellent websites. I write regularly for Counterpunch, which is just great. And on all these issues, Counterpunch is right there. It's right there, spreading information. That's what the press is supposed to do. Enable people to be aware of all these things and also to challenge power. And Counterpunch is right there. Nation of Change is another excellent website. Op-Ed News, Common Dreams, there's a bunch of them. And of course, talking on the nuclear issue, there's this extraordinary woman who lives out in California named Libby Halevi. You gotta watch, you gotta listen to, go to Libby Halevi and listen to what she and her guests have to say.
Thank you for that, Karl. And thank you for all of the decades of work that you have put in on this issue. I mean, if people want the trail of breadcrumbs to follow as to how this industry happened and what it has done and the various outrages, they can look up your books and just read their way through them, because it's clear, it's concise, it is footnoted, it is the truth, and it's nothing that gets taught in school. You have to look for this information.
Yeah, and let me note in terms of my website, if anybody would find it difficult to find, it's karlgrossman.com. And also, I'm involved in a nonprofit TV operation now for 30 years called EnviroVideo. And just go to EnviroVideo.com and you can watch online. In fact, just a couple of months ago, I did a show on the Trump Space Force. You can watch the whole show, half an hour. Or, you mentioned Kevin Camps, I did a half-hour TV, in fact, 2 half-hour TV interviews with Kevin Camps, one, the Trump nuclear push. There's hundreds of shows you can watch. So what I try to do in kind of every media means possible, books and radio, television, articles and so forth, is to get the information out, because I think an aware public is key. That's what democracy is predicated on. People who know what's happening and are committed to changing things.
That's what this audience is. That's what so many of them do. We're welcome to have other people join in with this. And Karl, your leadership and your information flow through the years has just been superb and reliable and something that we can use at all times. So thank you for being my guest this week on Nuclear Hot Seat.
It's been, well, these are horrible subjects, but it's a pleasure to speak about them with you, Libby.
That was award-winning investigative journalist Karl Grossman. You can check out the enormous range of Karl's work at karlgrossman.com, and Karl is spelled with a K. And he is offering a free download of the latest edition of his book, Cover-Up, What You Are Not Supposed to Know About Nuclear Power. For your convenience, we have a link up to that PDF download on the website, nuclearhotseat.com, under this episode, number 463. You will want this as part of your essential library for understanding all things nuclear.
Activist, shout out, shout out, shout out, shout out.
Followers of this show will have heard of the Kings Bay Plowshares 7, the peace activists who were arrested for their nonviolent, symbolic disarmament action at the largest nuclear submarine base in the world on April 4th, 2018. Two of the seven, Martha Hennessy and Patrick O'Neill, were interviewed for Nuclear Hot Seat number 452 on February 18. Now, as they face sentencing on May 28th and or 29th, they will be providing a webinar discussing the need for civil resistance disarmament actions, such as they took against the continued buildup of militarism and the destitute condition of our world before and during the pandemic. They are holding a webinar on Saturday, May 9th from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and we will have links up on the website, nuclearhotseat.com, under this episode, number 463. And if anyone out there is interested in putting together your own podcast, as I have been getting email and calls and communications from people who have been asking me how to do it, I'm going to be giving a talk in the next week. It will be online on Zoom, of course, as everything is, to let you know how I might be able to assist you in putting your own podcast together on whatever topic you like. If you want to have more information, send me an email at info@nuclearhotseat.com or message me on Facebook, and I'll get back to you and give you the details as to when this will be happening. This has been Nuclear Hot Seat for Tuesday, May 5th, 2020. If you haven't done so already, go to our Nuclear Hot Seat Facebook page and like it, share it, follow it, respond to a post, and then go to the website and sign up to get Nuclear Hot Seat every week. There's a yellow opt-in box. Just go there, fill it out, and you will get one email a week, so you don't have to miss a single episode. And if you appreciate weekly, verifiable news updates about nuclear issues around the world, take a moment, go to Nuclear Hot Seat, look for that big red and big green button, and do what you can to help, because we are really grateful for your support. Nuclear Hot Seat is copyright 2020, Libby, Halevi, and Hardestry Communications. All rights reserved, but fair use allowed, as long as proper attribution is provided. This is Libby Halevi of Hardestry Communications, the heart of the art of communicating, reminding you that once you know the truth about nuclear technology in all its forms, the only sane response is to be against it. That is your nuclear wake-up call. Now do not go back to sleep, because we are all in the Nuclear Hot Seat.
Nuclear Hot Seat. It's the bomb.